All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're diving headfirst into the world of English idioms.
The phrases that, well, they make you sound like you really know what you're talking about.
Like you're not just learning from a textbook.
Exactly.
We're working with a script, actually, from an English lesson all about these advanced phrases.
And rather than just running through all of them, we thought it would be fun to pick out some of the most colorful ones.
Yeah, the ones that really make you go, that's a cool way to say that.
And try to understand not just what they mean, but like how they work, what makes them tick.
Okay, so the first one that jumped out at me, I mean, who doesn't love a good secret? But then you've got someone like begging you to spill the beans.
Right. Yes, spill the beans. It's all about revealing a secret or a surprise.
Yeah, and it's not just about giving away the information.
No, there's a sense of anticipation, a little bit of mischief maybe even.
Right, like imagine you're planning a surprise party.
Oh, yeah?
And everyone's trying so hard to keep it quiet. But you can just see the excitement bubbling over. And that's when you say, come on, spill the beans. Who else is in on this?
Exactly. And you know, the funny thing is spill the beans, it actually has a really interesting history.
Oh, does it?
It goes all the way back to ancient Greece, where voting, believe it or not, was often done using beans. White beans meant yes, and black beans meant no.
Oh, wow.
So if you, say, accidentally knocked over the container,
you'd be revealing the results, literally spilling the beans.
You got it. I mean, isn't that fascinating? Each of these little phrases,
yeah,
it's like a little window into the past.
Yeah. Speaking of the past, this next one, by the skin of your teeth, I mean, that just paints such a vivid picture in my mind.
It does, and it means barely escaping disaster. You know, achieving something, but only just...
Yeah, like by the narrowest margin possible.
I always picture someone like sprinting to catch a train just as the doors are closing.
Oh, yeah. And they make it on just barely.
Out of breath, heart pounding.
Yeah, and there's this incredible feeling of relief.
That sense of, I can't believe I made it.
Right, like against all odds.
And it's something, you know, we all connect with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We love those stories of close calls and narrow escapes.
Okay, this next phrase isn't quite as triumphant. In fact, it's kind of brutal. Throw someone under the bus.
Yeah, this one definitely has a darker edge to it.
Doesn't it? It implies betrayal, right? Like to save yourself.
Exactly, often at the expense of someone else.
Like in a really cutthroat environment.
You see it a lot, unfortunately, in workplaces, maybe even just in social situations.
Yeah, those times when you need to protect your own reputation, even if it means sacrificing someone else.
Right.
Not a pretty picture. Like taking credit for someone else's work or blaming them for your own mistakes.
Yeah, definitely not a compliment to be thrown under the bus.
Not at all. Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit. What about barking up the wrong tree? I mean, I can't help but smile when I hear that one.
It's such a great visual, isn't it?
It is. Like picturing this dog just going crazy at the base of a tree.
And meanwhile, the squirrel is like way off in the bushes somewhere.
Totally oblivious.
And it's a perfect metaphor for, well, pursuing a mistaken course of action.
Like you're totally on the wrong track.
Yeah, but what I love is the tone. It's often delivered with a kind of a playful, gentle nudge.
It's like, hey, I think you might want to rethink this one, buddy.
Exactly. Speaking of wrong tracks, have you ever noticed how bad luck seems to come in waves?
Oh, yeah. It's like when it rains, it pours.
And that's where add insult to injury comes in.
It's like the universe is piling on.
It is. You lose your keys, your phone dies, you miss the bus, all in the same morning.
It's like, come on, give me a break.
And this phrase really gets at that feeling of, you know, a bad situation becoming even worse.
Like a little extra kick while you're already down.
And I think even though it's describing something negative, there's a certain humor in it.
There is. It's like finding the absurdity in the midst of chaos.
Exactly. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some phrases that are, well, a bit more about everyday life, like run-of-the-mill.
This one's all about the ordinary, the unremarkable.
Yeah, your average Tuesday afternoon kind of stuff.
Nothing special, just the usual.
But you know, there's something to be said for the ordinary.
There is. Like, it's not always about the big, exciting things, right?
Right. Sometimes it's the familiar, the comfortable that we really crave.
Like that local coffee shop you always go to.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, but it's just...
Right? Exactly. Now, on the flip side, we have a dime a dozen.
Oh, this one's interesting. So this means something is super common, right?
Extremely common, and therefore not very valuable.
It's like those trends that everyone jumps on for 5 minutes and then forgets about.
Oh, yeah. Like, remember fidget spinners?
Oh my gosh, yes. Those were everywhere and then poof. gone.
A dime a dozen.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, do we value things less when they're easy to get?
That's a good point. Maybe it's a reminder to appreciate what we have, even the simple things.
Right. Because what's common to one person might be a treasure to another.
Absolutely. Well said.
Okay, so speaking of valuing what we have, sometimes we need to, hit the ground running.
Ah, yes. Hit the ground running.
Yeah.
This one's all about starting strong.
Right. Being ready to go from the get-go. Full speed ahead.
Like starting a new job or launching a big project.
It's that feeling of, I'm prepared, I'm motivated, and I'm going to give it my all.
Yeah. You're not wasting any time.
No hesitation. And I think there's a real sense of enthusiasm in this phrase.
I agree. It's about being excited to tackle a challenge.
It really is. Okay, I think we have time for one more before we take a little break.
Okay, let's go for it.
So this one is, it's about reaching a breaking point. You know that moment when you've just had enough?
The last straw. I know exactly what you mean.
That's the one, that final incident that just pushes you over the edge.
I think you've been putting up with something for ages, and then bam, there's one little thing and you snap.
It's the straw that breaks the camel's back, as they say.
And it could be anything, right?
Yeah.
Like a series of small annoyances that just build up.
Or one big thing that just sends you over the edge.
And it's a reminder, I think, that we all have our limits.
Absolutely. Sometimes you just got to say, enough is enough.
Well, we'll be back in a moment with even more of these fascinating English phrases.
We're just getting started.
So stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We are uncovering all the mysteries behind these colorful English phrases.
Yeah, these sayings that we use all the time, but maybe haven't really stopped to think about.
Right, like where they come from.
Yeah, or what they really mean.
Exactly.
Okay, so next up we have one that I think everyone can relate to, up in the air.
Ah, yes. Up in the air. It's that feeling of uncertainty. Like when things are undecided, plans are on hold. You're just kind of waiting to see what happens.
It's that feeling of like limbo, almost.
Yeah, it is. Like imagine you're waiting to hear back about a job offer or like a college acceptance.
Oh yeah, those are definitely up in the air moments.
Big time. And your whole life kind of feels like it's hanging in the balance.
It really does. It's nerve-wracking.
But also, there's a sense of possibility too. Things could go either way.
That's true. It could be good or bad. We just don't know yet.
Exactly. Okay, this next phrase, it's not quite as lighthearted. A tough pill to swallow.
Ooh. Yeah, this one is about facing reality, even when it's hard.
Like accepting something you don't want to accept.
But you have to. Like, what if your favorite band broke up?
Oof. Yeah, that would be...
That would be a tough pill to swallow.
For sure, especially if you're a diehard fan.
Right. Or what if you're really hoping for a promotion, but it goes to someone else?
Oh, yeah. Those are those moments where it's like, ugh, okay, got to deal with this.
And sometimes those tough pills, they force us to grow.
That's true. Maybe it's a chance to discover something new, a new path.
Yeah, sometimes you got to close one door to open another one, right?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Okay, so this next phrase always makes me think of those like epic movie montage scenes, where the hero is training and getting ready for the big challenge.
Oh, pull out all the stops. That's a good one.
That's it. It's about giving something your absolute all, putting in maximum effort.
Yeah, like you're holding nothing back.
Right. Imagine you're planning a huge event like a wedding or a big fundraiser.
You could pull out all the stops to make it amazing.
You got it. It's about going above and beyond, exceeding expectations.
Yeah. No half measures here.
Right. Okay, this next one just conjures up such a vivid image, caught red-handed.
It's like something straight out of a detective movie.
It is. You can practically see the scene, the culprit standing there, the evidence right there in their hands.
There's no denying it, no escape.
They're busted. And there's something about that, that moment of being caught. It's just so dramatic.
Yeah, like the jig is up.
It speaks to our fascination with justice, We want to see the truth revealed.
Okay, so let's talk about go the extra mile. This one's all about effort, isn't it?
It is. It's about going above and beyond what's expected, putting in that extra effort.
Not just doing the bare minimum.
No, it's about exceeding expectations, showing that you really care.
Like if a coworker stays late to help you with a project.
Even though they don't have to.
Yeah, that's definitely going the extra mile.
It can be the little things too, like taking the time to really listen to someone.
Or offering to help out when you see someone struggling.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful, considerate.
Yeah, those little acts of kindness that make a big difference.
Absolutely. And lastly, we have a phrase that perfectly captures, the power of trends.
Jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
This one's about joining the crowd, right?
It is. It's about embracing something that's popular, maybe a new trend, a movement.
Like when a new song comes out and suddenly everyone's listening to it.
Or a new fashion trend emerges and everyone's wearing it.
Yeah, it's like this irresistible force that pulls people in.
And while it can sometimes have a negative connotation, like, oh, you're just following the crowd.
Right.
But it also speaks to this human need to belong.
Yeah, to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
It's fascinating, isn't it? That tension between individuality and conformity.
It really is. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here with these 15 phrases.
We have, and it makes you realize just how much richness and depth there is in everyday language.
Yeah, we use these phrases all the time, but maybe we haven't really stopped to appreciate the stories they tell.
The history, the imagery, the emotions they evoke.
It's amazing. But before we wrap up, we have one final thought-provoking question for you.
All right, let's hear it.
What new phrases do you think will emerge in the future? You know, what words and expressions will capture the essence of our times? That's a question that really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
As we wrap up our deep dive into these fascinating phrases,
Yeah.
it really gets you wondering, like, what will people be saying 100 years from now?
Right, like what new expressions will they come up with?
Especially with all the technology changing so fast.
Oh, yeah. Like imagine the phrases that might come out of the metaverse or, space travel.
Ooh, space travel. That's a good one.
Like,
We might start saying things like, oh man, I'm feeling so meta fatigued, or, oh, my avatar needs a serious style upgrade.
I love it.
Or like, imagine phrases inspired by space travel.
Oh, yeah, like let's blast off to that new restaurant.
Oh.
Or that movie was a total black hole of boredom.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
And it's not just about new words.
Right. Not at all.
Like, think about how the meaning of viral has completely changed because of social media.
Oh, absolutely. That's a perfect example.
So these phrases, they're not static. They evolve along with us.
That's what makes language so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So as we conclude our deep dive today, I think the biggest takeaway is to stay curious.
Right. Keep your ears open.
Exactly. Pay attention to the way people are speaking, the new words they're using, the creative ways they're expressing themselves.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to experiment with your own language, too.
Right. Try out some of these phrases we've talked about, see how they feel.
You might even invent some new phrases of your own.
You never know. Because language is all about communication, connection, and creativity, right?
Absolutely.
So go out there and have fun with it.
Happy language exploring.
All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously cool stuff with me today?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome, because we are going deep into a 20-minute lesson plan. And this one is all about helping you master intros.
Yeah.
You know, like when you meet someone new.
Oh, yeah.
And sharing your experiences, like how to tell a captivating story. It's all about boosting that conversational charisma so you can ditch those awkward silences and connect with people like a pro.
You know what I find really interesting about this plan? It's not just about memorizing lines or, like a script.
Yeah.
It's about understanding like the psychology behind a truly great introduction.
Oh, totally.
And they really walk you through it step by step from like warming up those conversational muscles
Yeah.
to actually role-playing scenarios. So it's like you're not just learning the theory.
Right.
You're building real confidence in those practical skills you can actually use out in the wild.
I love that. And you know what else I love?
Right.
How they kick things off with an icebreaker activity.
Uh-huh.
It's so simple, but so clever. Okay, so picture this. You pair up with someone and you share a unique fact about yourself, something that most people wouldn't guess. Like a little treasure hunt of personal trivia, right?
I like that.
So what's something most people wouldn't guess about you?
Oh, wow. Putting me on the spot already.
Exactly.
I don't know. Maybe I used to be a competitive ballroom dancer.
No way.
Yeah, it's true.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It gets
Yeah.
you thinking, and it's a fantastic way to break the ice without feeling like all eyes are on you, you know?
It's true. And it subtly shifts everyone's mindset from feeling like, oh gosh, I have to perform or say something super clever.
Exactly.
To realizing that, hey, everyone has something interesting to share. It
Yeah.
creates this instant sense of camaraderie and it sets the stage for, more genuine sharing as the conversation goes on.
It's like a warm-up for your soul.
I like that.
So, okay, you're all warmed up, feeling good. Now it's time to level up your vocabulary.
Okay.
This plan introduces 5 advanced expressions that, let's be honest, make you sound incredibly sophisticated. It's like giving your intros a linguistic makeover.
Love it.
So the first one is, I hail from.
Ooh, fancy.
Now, doesn't that sound so much more intriguing than just saying I'm from?
Definitely paints a more vivid picture.
Right.
Instead of just stating a location, you're evoking a sense of origin and background.
Yes.
Remember the example they used?
Uh-huh.
I hail from a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Tuscany.
Oh, stop it.
Suddenly, you're not just from Italy, you're from a place with history, with charm. Maybe even some delicious pasta.
I'm already picturing the vineyards.
Right.
And it's not just about sounding fancy. It's about being memorable.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the next phrase I'm passionate about.
Ah.
It's engaging, and it tells people what lights you up.
What's interesting here is that it's not just about listing hobbies.
Yeah.
It's about conveying your enthusiasm and even hinting at the values that drive you.
That's a good point.
So, for example, instead of saying, I like photography,
Right.
you could say, I'm passionate about capturing the fleeting beauty of everyday moments.
Ooh, I like that.
It adds depth and personality.
It's like you're not just taking pictures. You're an artist capturing those little moments in time.
Exactly.
Now, this next phrase is a conversation starter. One thing that shaped me was it's an invitation to share a pivotal moment in your life and show how you've evolved.
It's a powerful way to create a connection by revealing a piece of your personal journey. And it doesn't have to be, some grand life-altering event.
Right.
The example they use is, one thing that shaped me was learning to play the guitar as a teenager.
Oh.
It's relatable, it's intriguing, and it makes you want to know more.
It's like a sneak peek into the experiences that have made you who you are today.
Exactly.
And for those of us who like to explore different interests I've dabbled in.
Ooh, like that one.
It's a more playful way to acknowledge experiences that might not define you, but have still enriched your life,
Yeah, I think this phrase is particularly useful in more informal settings. It allows you to showcase your curiosity and willingness to try new things without feeling like you have to be an expert in everything.
Oh, totally.
Imagine saying, I've dabbled in pottery, and let's just say I'm much better at appreciating art than creating it. A little self-deprecating humor, which can instantly put people at ease.
That's a great point. Humor can be such a powerful tool for connection.
It really can.
Now, this last phrase is all about self-awareness. If I had to describe myself in 3 words,
Oh, this is a tough one.
talk about a challenge, right? It forces you to distill your essence and think critically about how you want to present yourself to the world.
It's a great exercise in personal branding.
It is.
The example they give is curious, creative, and compassionate.
Nice.
And notice how these words not only describe personality traits, but also suggest values and a way of approaching the world.
It's like a mini mission statement for your life.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this arsenal of impressive vocabulary, but how do we actually use it to craft a killer introduction?
That's the big question, right?
Well, that's where the guided practice section comes in.
Okay.
This is where they give you a structured template and an example introduction that flows beautifully.
I love a good template.
Me too. Because, sometimes you just need that little bit of structure.
This template is so valuable because it helps you avoid those dreaded ums and ahs, the ones that can creep in
Oh, yeah.
and make you sound less confident.
Totally.
It provides a framework to follow so your thoughts can flow more naturally, making you sound polished and prepared.
It's like having training wheels for your conversation.
Aha. I love that.
And the example they give, it's golden. It goes something like this. Hi, I'm Elena. I hail from sunny Barcelona, Spain. Currently, I'm working as a software engineer for a startup. One thing that shaped me was traveling solo for 6 months through Southeast Asia. If I had to describe myself in 3 words, I'd say I'm curious, adventurous, and a bit of a coffee fanatic.
I love how effortlessly it weaves those advanced phrases in. You get a sense of Elena's personality, her background, even a hint of her values, all in a few sentences.
It's like a condensed movie trailer for Elena's life.
Right. So concise, engaging makes you want to learn more.
Exactly. Okay, introductions. Check. Now let's talk storytelling, the heart of good conversation.
This is where we go beyond just stating facts. We start weaving them into a compelling narrative, right?
Yes, and the lesson plan breaks it down so well. A simple 3-part structure.
The start, middle, and end.
Which sounds obvious, but having that clear framework makes all the difference when you're trying to, hook people with your story.
It's like building a house. You need that solid foundation, the well-constructed frame, and the roof to tie it all together.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
So for the start, you set the scene, introduce the characters.
Then in the middle, you describe the event, what made it significant.
And finally, at the end, you share the outcome and what you learned from the whole experience.
They use a great example of running a marathon to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
The story starts with the decision to run despite not being a runner at all.
Right.
The middle dives into those challenges, the self-doubt that come up during training.
And that feeling when you just want to give up.
Exactly. And then the end focuses on the triumph of crossing that finish line and that valuable lesson learned about pushing past your perceived limits.
See, it's such a relatable story because I think everyone has had those moments where they're like, I can't do this.
We've all been there.
But then you find that inner strength and you keep going. But what makes this story so effective is the details,
Yeah, the details are everything.
Describing the feeling of wanting to quit at mile 18 or that overwhelming sense of accomplishment at the finish line.
Exactly. It's those details that bring the story to life and let the listener connect with the emotions behind it.
It's not just what happened, it's how it made you feel.
Right.
Okay, so structure, we got it. But what about delivery? How do we make sure our stories land with impact?
That's where the role-playing activity comes in.
Ooh, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. So the lesson plan has, you imagine you're at a networking event,
Okay.
and you have to introduce yourself and share a story or an interesting fact.
I can see how some people might be hesitant to role play.
Oh, for sure. It can feel awkward, especially if you're not used to putting yourself out there.
But isn't that kind of the point, to get comfortable with those feelings and develop the confidence to share your story, even when you're feeling a bit vulnerable?
Absolutely. It's like any skill, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Yeah.
And the beauty of role-playing is that safe environment. You know, you can experiment, get feedback, refine your approach without the pressure of a real-life situation.
It's like a dress rehearsal before opening night.
Exactly. And speaking of wrapping things up, the lesson plan ends with reflection and homework. They encourage you to identify a phrase or technique you enjoyed using, even write a detailed introduction for the next class.
So it's like learning is an ongoing process.
Precisely. It's not just about memorizing a few phrases or practicing a couple introductions. It's about developing that growth mindset and constantly seeking ways to improve your communication skills.
You're always leveling up.
Exactly. This lesson plan gives you the tools, but it's up to you to keep using them and refining your approach over time.
What's really hitting me is that this lesson plan, it's not just about becoming a smooth talker.
Right.
It's about becoming a better communicator overall,
Oh, absolutely.
which honestly can benefit you in every single aspect of life.
Think about it. How many times have you struggled to articulate your thoughts or feelings?
All the time.
Or felt like you weren't really connecting with someone?
Yeah.
This lesson plan gives you the tools to bridge those communication gaps and build stronger, more meaningful relationships.
It's funny, we often think of communication as something that just, happens
Yeah.
naturally, but it's really a skill.
It is.
And like any skill, it takes practice and intention to develop.
What I find fascinating is that even though we communicate all the time, constantly,
Yeah.
we rarely take the time to actually analyze how we do it.
That's so true.
This lesson plan encourages you to become more mindful of your communication style and to identify areas where you can improve.
So it's like having a personal trainer, but for your communication skills.
Exactly.
It helps you pinpoint your strengths, work on your weaknesses, and ultimately become a more confident and effective communicator.
And the best part is you can see the results in real time, you
Right.
know? As you practice these techniques, you'll notice that conversations flow more easily, connections deepen, and misunderstandings become less frequent.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listener with a challenge.
Okay, I like it.
Don't just file this information away, put it into practice. I challenge you to try out one of these techniques today.
Yes, don't wait for the perfect opportunity. Start small.
Maybe you try out one of those power phrases at your next meeting,
Ooh, good one.
or share a story with a friend using that start, middle, and end structure we talked about.
Pay attention to how people respond. You might be surprised by the impact a few well-chosen words or a well-told story can have.
And most importantly, have fun with it. Communicating shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be an opportunity to connect, to share, and to express yourself authentically.
Every conversation is a chance to learn and grow. So embrace those opportunities and watch as your communication skills blossom.
You got this. We have absolute faith in your ability to become a more confident and engaging communicator. Until next time, happy connecting. Okay, imagine this. You're at a cafe, just eavesdropping on the conversation at the next table.
Yeah.
And they're like, my car broke down.
Oh, no.
I'm totally running out of time. I just want to give up and go home.
Classic.
And you're thinking, wait, what's with all these verbs and prepositions? It's like a secret code.
Right. It's phrasal verbs galore.
Exactly. So That's what we're diving into today, phrasal verbs.
Those tricky little combos that can make or break your fluency.
We're going deep with this awesome guide to the top 10 most frequently used phrasal verbs.
Which I'm excited to unpack with you.
Because once you master these, you'll sound so much more natural.
It's like leveling up your English, you know?
Totally. So first up, get up.
Ah, the classic.
Seems pretty basic, right? I mean, it's like, getting out of bed.
Yeah, the guide defines it as rising from bed or a sitting position.
Right, but I feel like there's more to it.
Oh, there always is with phrasal verbs.
Like you might get up for work, but you might get yourself up after a tough workout,
Exactly, that yourself adds a little extra oomph.
Right, like you're really pushing through.
All about the nuance.
I love it. Okay, so the practice sentence here asks, what time do you get up on weekends?
Ooh, good question.
What about you? Are you an early bird or do you sleep in?
Weekends are for sleeping in.
Same here.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on to turn on and turn off.
These are like the bread and butter of phrasal verbs.
Right. I mean, we're constantly turning things on and off.
Lights, TVs, phones, you name it.
The guide gives us the classic examples like, can you turn on the lights? And don't forget to turn off the TV.
Simple but essential.
But I'm curious, is there anything interesting about the history of these, given how tied they are to technology?
That's a really good point. You wouldn't have had turn on the TV a couple hundred years ago.
Right.
It shows how language adapts to new inventions.
And I bet there are tons of new phrasal verbs popping up now with all the tech we have. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's stick with the guide's practice sentence. I turned off my phone during the meeting.
Ooh, the digital detox.
Have you ever done that, or are you someone who's constantly checking their phone, even in meetings?
I try to be present and turn it off, but sometimes it's hard.
I feel you. The temptation is real.
It is.
Okay, next up is look after.
Which means to take care of someone or something.
Right. But again, I feel like there are different levels to this.
No, absolutely. It's not just about glancing at something. It's about responsibility and care.
The guide's example is, can you look after my dog while I'm on vacation?
A classic pet sitting request.
But it's not just about watching the dog. It's about making sure they're fed, walked, loved.
Exactly. It's a deeper level of care.
The practice sentence for this one is, it's not easy to look after 3 kids at once.
Ooh, that's a whole other level.
Can you imagine?
Definitely a juggling act.
Speaking of juggling acts, have you ever felt like you were running out of time, energy, patience, maybe even coffee?
Oh, all the time.
That brings us to our next phrasal verb, run out of.
Which can be used in so many situations.
Right. The guide defines it as using up all of something.
And it often has that sense of urgency or need, like, we're running out of milk.
Or I'm running out of time to finish this project.
Exactly. It captures that feeling of depletion.
And it doesn't always have to be physical things. You can run out of ideas, motivation.
Even patience, like we were just talking about.
The guide's example is, we've run out of milk. Can you buy some more?
A classic grocery list problem.
Happens all the time in my house.
I bet.
Okay, so the practice sentence asks, I ran out of ideas during the brainstorming session.
Oof, I've been there.
Have you ever hit that wall creatively?
Oh, yeah, especially in high-pressure situations.
It's like your brain just shuts down.
Totally.
Okay, ready for a quick wardrobe change?
Always.
Because next up, we have put on and take off, which are all about clothing.
And accessories. Don't forget the accessories.
Right. The guide keeps it simple. Put on is to wear something. Take off is to remove it.
Like we put on our shoes in the morning.
And take off our jackets when we come inside.
But sometimes we even put on a brave face.
Or take off our metaphorical hats to someone.
It's amazing how they can be used both literally and figuratively.
The guide's examples are, it's cold outside, put on your jacket.
Good advice.
And she took off her shoes before entering the house.
Always a good idea.
Do you always take off your shoes when you go inside?
I try to. Yeah, it just feels more comfortable.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, the practice sentence for this one is, I always put on sunscreen before going to the beach.
Sun protection is key.
What about you? What's your essential put on before hitting the beach?
A good hat is a must for me.
Smart.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to a phrasal verb that can be a bit tricky. Give up.
Yeah, this one has both positive and negative connotations.
Right. I mean, you can give up on something because it's too hard.
Or you can give up something that's no longer serving you.
The guide defines it as to stop trying or quit something.
Which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the situation.
Their example is very motivational, though. Never give up on your dreams.
It's a good reminder to persevere.
But sometimes Knowing when to give up is just as important.
Absolutely. Like if you're constantly banging your head against a wall.
Right. Maybe try a different door.
Exactly. Sometimes giving up opens up new possibilities.
I love that perspective. Okay, the practice sentence for give up is a bit more personal. I wanted to learn guitar, but I gave up after a few months.
Oh, I relate to that.
Have you ever had that experience with a hobby or a skill you were trying to learn?
Oh, yeah. I tried learning to knit once, and it just wasn't happening.
It's okay to admit defeat sometimes.
Totally.
All right. Ready for a phrasal verb that can be both literal and figurative?
Bring it on.
Okay, it's break down.
This one can refer to everything from cars to emotional meltdowns.
Right, like your car can break down on the freeway.
Or you can have a breakdown when you hear bad news.
Two very different scenarios, but the same phrasal verb ties them together.
It's all about context.
Exactly. Okay, the guide's practice sentence asks, what do you usually do when your computer breaks down?
Ooh, the dreaded blue screen of death.
Do you have a go-to solution or do you panic?
I try to troubleshoot it myself, but I'm not afraid to call for help.
Same here. Sometimes you just need a tech guru to save the day.
For sure.
Speaking of saving the day, have you ever had to pick someone up from the airport last minute?
Oh, yeah. It happens all the time.
That's like the classic friend move, right?
Definitely.
Which brings us to our next phrasal verb, pick up.
Which, as we've just hinted at, can mean to collect someone or something.
But it also has a few other meanings.
Like to lift something off the ground.
Or to learn something quickly.
It's a multi-talented phrasal verb.
But guide's examples are, pick up that book off the floor.
For the literal meaning.
And I'll pick you up from the airport. For the collecting meaning.
It's all about context.
Okay, to get your brain working on all those different meanings, the practice sentence is, she picked up the book and started reading.
Ooh, getting lost in a good book.
What was the last thing you picked up?
I picked up a new cookbook the other day.
Nice. What kind of cuisine?
It's all about Mediterranean dishes.
Ooh, sounds delicious.
It is.
Maybe you can pick me up from the airport sometime when we can have a Mediterranean feast.
Yeah.
Speaking of picking things up, how do you usually find out about new restaurants or events in your city?
Ooh, that's a good question. I usually rely on word of mouth and social media.
Which perfectly segues into our next phrasal verb, find out.
Which is all about uncovering information and satisfying our curiosity.
It's like being a detective in the world of language.
Exactly. We're constantly trying to find things out, whether it's big news or just what our friends are up to.
The guide's example is, I need to find out what time the train leaves.
Very practical.
But it can also be about deeper discoveries, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay, the guy's practice sentence is, how did you find out about the concert?
That makes me think about all the different ways we consume information these days.
So what are your go-to sources for finding out about cool stuff happening?
I think it's a mix of everything: social media, word of mouth, good old-fashioned internet searching.
I usually get most of my intel from friends and family.
They're like your personal news curators.
Exactly. Speaking of news curators, have you ever noticed how some headlines use really dramatic phrasal verbs?
Oh, totally.
Like, politician calls out opponent, or celebrity couple breaks up.
It's all about grabbing your attention.
Did a phrasal verb battle royale out there. Okay, we're down to our final phrasal verb for this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
It's one that can be both practical and romantic. Take out.
Ah, yes. This one has multiple personalities.
Like you can take out the trash, which is pretty straightforward.
But you can also take someone out on a date.
The guide's examples highlight this perfectly. Can you take out the trash?
For the chore-related meaning.
And he took her out for dinner last night for the dating scenario.
Two very different vibes.
The practice sentence for this one is, I took out my wallet to pay for the coffee.
A very relatable everyday action.
So when is the last time you took something out?
I think I took out my frustration on a jigsaw puzzle earlier.
Ooh, that's a good way to release some stress.
It is.
And it speaks to the figurative meaning of takeout, right?
Exactly. It can mean to remove something physically, but also to express or release something emotionally.
It's like a phrasal verb with a double life.
Which is what makes them so fascinating.
Totally. We've just scratched the surface with these 10 common phrasal verbs.
But I bet you're starting to see how they pop up everywhere.
They're like the secret ingredient to sounding more natural in English.
And the more you pay attention to them, the more you'll start to notice their nuances.
So what are your thoughts so far? Any phrasal verbs that have particularly stood out to you?
I'm ready to dive deeper.
I'm with you. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back for more phrasal verb fun.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more phrasal verb fun.
Me too. It's like we're uncovering this hidden layer of the English language.
Right. And before the break, we were talking about how they can reflect cultural nuances.
Yeah, like take someone out for a date that's very American.
Exactly. In other cultures, inviting someone out might be phrased totally differently.
It's fascinating how these little phrases give us a glimpse into different cultures.
And even within English, phrasal verbs evolve over time, like with technology.
Oh, totally. Swipe right. That's a modern classic.
Exactly. Language is always adapting.
Okay, so we've explored this first batch of common phrasal verbs, but why are they so prevalent in English?
Well, it's partly historical. English loves combining verbs and prepositions.
It's like a linguistic Lego set.
I like that. And it allows for subtle shades of meaning.
Right, like look at versus look after. There's a difference.
Look after implies more responsibility.
Exactly. And while they can be tricky for learners, they make things easier for native speakers.
They're like shortcuts, but you have to know the code.
So it's a trade-off. Learners have to work harder, but then they unlock this fluency.
Precisely. Did you notice how some phrasal verbs cluster around certain themes?
Ooh, yeah, like a lot of these relate to daily routines.
Getting up, turning things on and off, running out of stuff.
It's like they reflect our everyday experiences.
And it makes learning them more engaging, right? You can connect them to your life.
Absolutely. It's not just memorizing lists, it's understanding how we use language in the real world.
Speaking of real-world experiences, have you ever had a phrasal verb mishap?
Ooh, let me think. Okay, this one time I was traveling in Europe, trying to order takeaway coffee, to go.
Yeah.
But instead of saying, take this coffee to go, I said, can I take this coffee off?
Oh, no.
The barista looked at me so confused.
I can imagine.
I was so flustered, I ended up just pointing and making gestures.
It happens to the best of us.
But it taught me a valuable lesson. You have to understand the nuances of these phrasal verbs.
Context is everything.
That's exactly. All right, I'm ready to dive into those new phrasal verbs you mentioned.
Let's do it.
All right, so those new phrasal verbs, you mentioned some before the break.
Yeah, they're like these little linguistic time capsules.
Capturing the zeitgeist.
Exactly. Binge watch. That's pure streaming culture.
And swipe right. Online dating in a nutshell.
It's even gone beyond dating, like swipe right to approve an idea.
I've heard that. It's amazing how language spreads.
But then there are the ones that reflect the maybe the downsides of modern life.
Like ghosting, the worst.
Yeah, it's like the digital version of disappearing.
And burnout, doom scrolling, those are heavy.
And capture that feeling of overwhelm,
Totally, like we're searching for the words to describe this modern anxiety.
Right.
But there are also some fun new ones. Level up is a good one.
Oh, yeah, that's a motivational one, like from video games.
It's about growth, progress.
Exactly, and it's playful.
And then there's adulting, which is just so relatable.
Ugh. Adulting. The millennial struggle.
It's like all those things we're supposed to know how to do.
Taxes, bills, appointment.
But we're all just figuring it out as we go.
Faking it till we make it.
And laughing about it on social media.
Exactly. Shared experiences, even if we're all adulting differently.
So what do all these new phrasal verbs tell us about the future of English?
I think they show how adaptable language is, always changing.
It's not static. It reflects how we live, how we communicate.
And phrasal verbs are a perfect example. They encapsulate trends, technology, even emotions.
It's like each one is a little snapshot of a moment in time.
What new ones will we have in 5 years, 10 years?
It's exciting to think about.
So for anyone listening, be curious about language. Pay attention to how it's used.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, to experiment.
You might even invent the next great phrasal verb.
That's the challenge I'm leaving everyone with.
Embrace the playfulness of language.
Phrasal verbs are just one small part of it, but they show how dynamic and fascinating English can be.
Exactly, and I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive.
Thanks for joining us on this linguistic adventure. Until next time, happy exploring the world of words.
Happy exploring.
Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something you use every day, probably without even thinking about it too much.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Numbers and time.
Okay, interesting. And how are we diving into that?
Well, our roadmap for this deep dive is a 100-minute lesson plan.
100 minutes. That's pretty intense.
Well, don't worry. We're giving you the express tour.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
I mean, you might be thinking, I already know numbers. I know how to tell time. But, think about it this way. This deep dive is about the structure of how we learn these concepts.
Ooh, okay. I like that.
Like whether you're teaching these concepts to somebody else, or maybe you're learning a new language, or maybe you're just fascinated by those everyday things that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, it's funny how the most basic things can actually be pretty complex when you really look at them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I found really interesting about this lesson plan that we're looking at is how systematic it is.
Oh, interesting.
Like, it starts with the most basic building blocks and then like methodically adds complexity as it goes.
So it like shows how our brains build up to a really sophisticated understanding, but like from a simple starting point.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty cool. And it jumps right in with numbers. Okay, so like 1, 2, 3.
Well, it actually starts with counting 1 to 20 first.
Okay, that does seem pretty basic.
Yeah. But does it really? I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like getting the number order right was like a big deal. Like, why does 7 come after 6?
You know, it's funny because when you think about it, that decimal system that we use every day, it really relies on understanding those first 10 digits, right? And then you build from there. And even across languages, a lot of languages have similar structures for those early numbers.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's kind of a common starting point for communication no matter where you are in the world.
So it's sort of like a universal language in a way.
In a way, yeah. Like a Rosetta Stone for numbers.
I like that. But then English gets tricky, right? Like 13 versus 30.
Ugh, don't even get me started. I still mix those up sometimes.
I know. It's like, why does English have to be so complicated sometimes?
Well, and the lesson plan actually like highlights those pronunciation pitfalls early on.
Ooh, that's sorry.
Like right from the beginning. It's like, okay, watch out for these. So after you get 1 to 20 down, then it moves on to like, how do you build bigger numbers? Like all the way up to 99.
And that's where understanding place value becomes like really, really important for
Place value. Right?
Yeah, like 21, 32, 45. It's all about seeing the pattern, how the 10s and the 1s like work together.
Oh, okay. So it's like you're cracking a code.
Exactly. It's like a number code.
So we've cracked the code up to 99.
We're on a roll.
But what about those giant numbers? Like, does it cover those too?
It does. So this lesson plan goes all the way up to 10,000.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it really emphasizes that logic of thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones.
Okay, so it's still building on that same foundation, even when you get to those really big numbers.
Exactly. It's all connected. And it even touches on Roman numerals, which I think is really fascinating.
Roman numerals, like IVX.
Yeah, because it shows how differently like ancient civilizations approached numbers.
Oh, that's cool. It's like a totally different way of thinking about it.
Right. It's like a whole other number system.
Yeah.
But let's get real for a second.
Yep.
How does this lesson plan actually help someone like use numbers in everyday life?
That's a good question. Like, it's great to know the theory, but how do you actually put it into practice?
Well, that's where it gets really practical. The lesson plan includes things like phone numbers, asking someone's age, talking about money.
Oh, okay. So like real world scenarios.
Exactly. Using phrases you'd actually encounter in daily conversations.
So it's kind of like a cheat sheet for real life conversations.
Exactly. And there's even a suggestion for a game of number bingo.
Bingo, like with numbers instead of letters.
Yeah. I mean, I love bingo, but do you think it actually helps with numbers? Or is it just like a fun activity?
Oh, I think games are fantastic for learning, especially for kids.
Oh, yeah.
Bingo can really help reinforce number recognition, the order of numbers.
And it's fun, so that's a bonus.
Exactly. Plus, a little friendly competition never hurt anyone.
Okay, so we've conquered the world of numbers.
At least up to 10,000.
But what about time? How does this lesson plan tackle that?
Time is next, and the lesson plan starts by addressing the two main ways we see time: analog and digital clocks.
Yeah, those are like the two biggies.
Right, and making sure you're comfortable with both is really key because you encounter both in the real world.
It's funny, I'm so used to digital clocks now that I almost forget how to read an analog clock sometimes.
I know, right? It's like a lost art.
But the lesson plan uses those like classic phrases for telling time, you know, like o'clock, quarter past, quarter to. But are those really universal? Like, do people in other countries say it the same way? That's a great question, and it actually brings up the like cultural aspect of time telling.
Interesting.
Like, those phrases are pretty common in a lot of English-speaking regions, but other cultures might have totally different ways of expressing those fractions of an hour.
So even something as basic as like quarter past isn't so straightforward.
Yeah, exactly. It really depends on where you are in the world and what language you're speaking.
Wow, I never thought about that before. So this lesson plan is making me realize there's a lot more to numbers and time than I initially thought.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
And the lesson plan also really emphasizes using a real clock to practice telling time.
Oh, yeah, that visual element is so important, especially if you're someone who learns best by seeing things.
So you can actually see the hands moving as you're saying the phrases.
Right. It helps solidify that connection between the, abstract idea of time and its physical representation.
So it's like you're making time tangible.
Exactly. You can actually see it happening.
That's pretty cool. And what I really appreciate about this lesson plan is how specific it is about, the actual phrases you would use for asking and telling time.
Oh, yeah, it gives you the words.
Yeah, it's not just about understanding what time it is, it's about how to actually say it in conversation.
So it's like giving you the script for those everyday interactions.
Yeah, exactly. And that could be super helpful for someone learning English or even just someone who gets, tongue-tied asking for the time.
I know, right? It can be surprisingly tricky.
It's like suddenly you forget how to say the simplest things.
Exactly. And this lesson plan, it just takes away all that guesswork and helps you build confidence.
And just like with the number section, it also encourages role-playing to practice those time-telling skills.
Oh, that's great. So you're not just learning the words, you're actually using them.
It's like putting it all into action.
Exactly. Learning by doing.
So where does this deep dive go from here? We've covered numbers, we've tackled telling time. What's next?
Well, now it gets personal.
Ooh,
The lesson plan shifts its focus to how we use numbers and time in our own daily lives.
Okay, now that's something I can relate to. I mean, everyone has a routine, right?
Exactly. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Glad to be back. So last time we were talking about how this lesson plan takes a really personal turn.
Yeah, it starts to focus on how we actually use numbers and time in our day-to-day life.
Like our routines.
Exactly. Waking up, going to work, bedtime, those everyday things.
Like they were reading my diary or something.
Right. But it's so smart how they incorporate the numbers and time telling we learned in the first part. It's not just about the concepts anymore. It's about applying them.
Oh, so they actually give you ways to practice.
Yeah, they actually suggest students write out their daily routines.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just saying, I wake up at 7, you'd write.
I wake up at 7 o'clock, or I wake up at 7:15. Using those specific phrases.
Right, right. So it reinforces what you've learned, but it's also personalized.
Exactly. And it made me think, we talk about routines all the time, but do we ever really stop and analyze them?
Analyze them. How do you mean?
Well, how much of our day is really dictated by the clock versus how much is actually our own choice?
That's a good question. Never really thought about it that way.
But the lesson plan doesn't just stop at routines, does it?
Nope. It goes beyond those basic routines and gets into things like appointments and transportation schedules.
Oh, okay. Stuff that can get a little tricky if you're not really comfortable with numbers and time.
Right. Like imagine trying to catch a bus or make a doctor's appointment if you can't clearly communicate what time you need to be there.
Oh, yeah. That's when it stops being theoretical and starts being real life stress.
Exactly. And that's why this lesson plan is so helpful. It gives you those tools to feel confident and in control, even in situations where you might feel a little anxious.
Makes sense. But how do you actually know if someone's really grasped all this? Is there a test? Of course. There's another quiz, and this time it mixes numbers and time together.
Ooh, a combo quiz. That sounds like a good challenge. Though, sometimes I think I learn more from making up the questions than actually answering them.
Oh, I totally agree. When you have to come up with the questions, you have to think about the material in a whole different way.
Yeah, you have to anticipate what someone else might need to know, and that really helps you understand it better yourself.
So maybe we should encourage our listener to try making their own quizzes about numbers and time.
Ooh, I like that. A deep dive challenge for our listeners. But before we get too carried away with quiz making, let's step back for a second.
Okay.
What have we actually learned from this deep dive into the lesson plan so far?
Well, I think it shows that even with something as basic as numbers and time, there's real method to learning them.
Like a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
Right.
You start with the building blocks, and then you layer on complexity, always making sure to connect back to how you'd actually use this stuff in real life.
It's like a reminder that learning should be both structured and meaningful.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting how interconnected everything is. We started with numbers, then time, then routines, and now these more complex scenarios.
It's like it all builds on itself.
Right. It's not just separate topics, it's all woven together.
And that's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
We'll see how this lesson plan really pushes learners to become fluent and confident with numbers and time in any situation.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into numbers and time. It's amazing how much ground we've covered, right?
It really is. We started with something as simple as counting to 20, and now look at us.
It's all thanks to this amazing lesson plan. The last part, we were talking about how it gets into these more like real life situations.
Yeah, like going to appointments, figuring out travel schedules, the stuff that can be kind of stressful if you're not totally comfortable with the language.
Exactly. And it's here in this final stretch that the lesson plan really seems to emphasize like conversational fluency.
Oh, for sure. It's like, okay, you've got the basics. Now let's make sure you can actually use them in real life.
So you're not just understanding numbers and time, you're actually able to use them without even thinking about it.
Right, like it becomes second nature.
So it's like taking all those building blocks that we've been working with and turning them into a fully functional, communication system.
I like that, a communication system. It's about bridging that gap between what you know in your head and what you can actually do out in the world.
Exactly. And one of the ways this lesson plan does that is through a final quiz. We talked about quizzes before, and I know you're a big fan of making your own quizzes.
Oh yeah, always a good challenge.
But what's special about this final quiz in the lesson plan?
Well, it's designed to be more challenging than the previous ones. It brings together numbers and time in these like more complex scenarios.
So it's not just like, what time is it?
No, it's more like, okay, if the train leaves at 4:15 and the journey takes 35 minutes, what time will you arrive? Stuff like that.
Ooh. Okay, that does sound a bit trickier.
It really makes you think, right? You have to do some calculations, put different pieces of information together.
And be able to explain your answer clearly.
Exactly. It's impressive considering this lesson plan started with basic counting.
It really is. But aside from quizzes, are there other ways the lesson plan encourages this real-world fluency?
Definitely. One of the last activities is a conversation practice where learners pair up and act out different scenarios.
Oh, fun.
It's like the grand finale. It brings everything together. Numbers, time, all the vocabulary they've learned.
Like they're finally performing on stage after weeks of rehearsals.
Exactly. And I bet it can be a bit nerve-wracking, putting yourself out there.
And also exciting, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a safe space to make mistakes and learn from them. And the more you practice, the more natural it all becomes.
So it's really about going beyond just knowing the material. It's about developing those communication skills.
For sure. It's about giving learners the confidence to navigate everyday situations.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
I agree.
We've seen how a well-structured lesson plan can take you from basic counting all the way to feeling empowered to use numbers and time in your everyday life.
And it's a great reminder that learning should be both fun and effective. I mean, who knew a deep dive into a 100-minute lesson plan could be so interesting?
So to all our listeners out there, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep challenging yourselves to learn new things. Until next time.